All right, we are getting ready for our next speaker. Our next speaker is coming in from the UK. Well, he's coming on my screen for now. Um,
That's it.
oh gosh, Angus, it's always good to see you and always good to chat with you. You always have so much good information to share.
Well, I hope so.
I hope, yes, yes, you definitely have good ones. I saw your presentation, I saw your slide deck. So I know
You're
you
very
have some really interesting things to talk about. And you're going to be talking about innovative and effective varnish removal for rotating equipment. And I know that was a question
welcome.
that we just had in our first session. So I know you're going to talk a lot more about that and go into detail. So without further ado, we have Angus with us, which is always great. I'm going to
Thank you.
get your presentation up on the screen and I'm going to pass it over to you because this is interesting because I'd like to see what the UK has in terms of the case studies and what they've been doing. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Tanya, thank you. A very early good morning to you
Oh,
in particular. Total respect. You're 4 o'clock in the morning in
yeah.
Trinidad. Thank you so much to all the team at LRVS for the opportunity to present this morning. And a huge thank you to everyone who is joining us around the globe. I know primarily here in the EMEA. But yeah, as Sanya kindly introduced, I'm going to be presenting a few UK-based case studies regarding a range of varnish removal solutions for, again, a range of rotating equipment. Firstly, a big thank you for Dr. Abid and his excellent presentation on turbine oil monitoring in Saudi Arabia. There's going to be a bit of crossover in terms of some of the case studies I'll be covering do also involve turbines. So just before we kick off, a brief outline of what I'll be presenting to you all today. Firstly, just a brief overview of my company, ANS International. Then we'll dive a bit into some of the varnish solutions we'll be discussing today before taking a more in-depth look at 5 particular UK businesses and some case studies around them before finishing up with a few key conclusions that we've gathered from those case studies. So firstly, who is ANS International? It's a business I founded with my brother Sean nearly 6 years ago here in the UK. I've got 20 years experience in the lubrication business. For many years, we represented a US lubricant manufacturer. And in the last 6 years, we've become a technical sales consultancy representing a range of machinery lubrication brands, and primarily via a global network of distributors. We work in more than 30 countries around the world, many of whom we've worked with for more than 30 years as an organization. Just very briefly, just a bit of an overview of some of the brands that we work with. These include our own private label, MacChem and Mac Lubes. These are maintenance chemicals and lubricants. The Viper wire rope lubricator, I think many people already know about. It's an Australian brand for the efficient cleaning and lubrication of wire ropes. Allspalita is a US bioremediation product for helping clean up hydrocarbon spills on land and water. Solnox Group are a British green tech with really innovative, eco-friendly, biodegradable fuel conditioners for reducing fuel consumption and also emissions. So many of the solutions have a key sustainability focus, and none more so than Fluitec. I've known many of the Fluitec team for up to 20 years now, the likes of Yo and Greg, and for the past 4 years, we've been representing Fluitec as a master distributor, very proudly working in a number of countries around the world, including Philippines, Greece, Chile, Costa Rica, and also specifically here in the UK, which is why I'm going to be presenting today on some of these specific case studies in the UK market. Okay, enough about ANS International. We're now going to be talking a bit about varnish removal for rotating equipment. So before we touch on these case studies, what do we actually mean by varnish? It's a huge subject, one that Sanya and Greg in particular know a lot about. I certainly don't have time to cover it all in the 25 minutes I've been allocated. But fundamentally, there are dozens of different chemistries that make up these deposits, and they depend on a number of factors. Could be the operating conditions of the machinery or equipment, could be the formulation of the lubricant, and the contamination that influences fluid degradation pathways. But bottom line, varnish is an oil-derived deposit, and it generally comprises of soft and soluble organic compounds. And as you can see with some of these images here, these are taken from a variety of applications around the world. It tends to be a kind of brown, orangey, sticky substance you can see on these gears, on bearings and these reservoirs. But what I would recommend, bit of a plug, Sanya, but if you want to know more and understand more about varnish, there's a fantastic book that they published last year, Preventing Turbo Machinery Cholesterol, The Story of Varnish. It's got absolutely everything you need to know about this subject. So in terms of the benefits of being ahead of the varnish problem, it certainly pays off over time. So we've just got a couple of snapshot examples of just how significantly varnish can impact businesses. So starting on the left, $1.5 million. That was varnish on a thrust bearing that shut down an oil refinery. Nearly $500,000, again, a varnish on a bearing, which contributed to compressor failure. This time sludge on a filter, which caused a gas turbine to trip out. And then finally, even up to $60,000 for varnish on a valve spool that prevented a gas turbine from going online. So it really can have significant impacts on maintenance and operating costs for a variety of applications. So a bit of background about what Fluitec does as a business. And they have a synergistic suite of products which align with the Fill for Life concept. And there's four main areas. Firstly, the expertise, which includes LLVS, which is where we are today, obviously, in fluid learning. Secondly, and really importantly, is the condition monitoring. The Fluitec team helped develop a number of key ASTM tests, a couple of which I will be discussing in a bit more detail today, including the MPC and the ruler. Dr. Abid mentioned the ruler in his last presentation, and they were designed to help monitor in-service lubricants, whether it's turbine oils, hydraulic oils, gear oils, etc. Thirdly, Fluitec also then developed a range of solutions for contamination control, which focus specifically on filtration that can safely remove varnish, which was a unique, innovative gel resin type technology, which can help to decontaminate systems. So that's the Vita ESP. And then finally, and most recently, a range of life extension products, which are technologies that are used to flush or remove varnish, as well as re-additize and rebalance in-service lubricants, which could be turbine oils, could be hydraulic fluids, compressor oils, even gear oils. So in this morning's presentation, I mentioned 5 case studies. What I wanted to highlight was the range of different industries and sectors. So we're going to be ranging from power generation to plastics, offshore oil and gas, and even an oil refinery. The applications include gas turbines, blow molding machines, air compressors. The lubricants understandably vary depending on the application, but include turbine oils and also hydraulic lubricants. And the main problems we're going to be looking at involve high varnish potential and the subsequent issues that is causing, which includes high bearing temperatures and really expensive downtime. And then finally, on each of the case studies, we'll be taking a look at the solutions that we implemented to help solve those problems. And that includes both the MPC analysis, the ASTM D7843, as well as the Decon Solvancer and a couple of other products that we will also take a look at. Okay, to kick off the first case study, a company called Innovia. They're a global business with obviously an operation in the UK, but also elsewhere, Australia, Germany, and Poland. Just over a year ago, Innovia contacted us directly due to some issues they were suffering with their Solar Taurus 70 gas turbine, 2,000 litres of turbine oil in there. And the main issue they were suffering from was elevated bearing temperatures. Initially, they didn't know what the reason was. But the big problem with these elevated temperatures that the turbine was starting to trip out and they were having to operate it on lower loads, which was obviously a major issue for the plant and their productivity. Luckily, with the support of Solar, the OEM, they implemented an oil analysis program, which included the MPC analysis. And very quickly, they could see what the potential issue was. The MPC figure came back of 49, which is elevated and would indicate significant varnish potential. They contacted us. We had a number of meetings, myself, also UMI, and we discussed the application in more detail, had a look at the oil analysis, and it was very obvious to us that these elevated bearing temperatures were due to this buildup of varnish on the bearings, which was helping to insulate in the heat for the turbine, and meaning that they were having significant problems. So we suggested and recommended that they implemented the use of Fluitec Decon, the Solvanza product, which, due to the high level of varnish, we recommended a 5% mix ratio, which would require about 6 pails of product. They did so around Christmas last year, and again, with our advice, then ran a number of oil analysis samples in the weeks and months following. And a couple of things happened. Firstly, and most importantly, the temperature started to drop on the turbine, which ensured that there was no further tripping, which was great news for them. But as you can also see here, the MPC started to steadily drop and decline, and continue to then remain low and stable. And the team, with our recommendation, have continued with quarterly oil analysis to verify the continued stability and low level of the varnish. On this next slide, bit of a snapshot. Sorry if it's a bit small, the font, but you can see the original oil analysis here before they used the decon with the very high level of MPC at 49, but also in terms of the particle counts here, you can see why there was a warning sign with these huge levels, 25, 23, 16. We've then graphed this, as you can see how the MPC value has steadily dropped over the last 6 months. And then, as you can see here, once, and this was back in June, where the MPC dropped down to a 3. So a very happy customer. It meant that they didn't have to have significant downtime by having to drain out 2,000 litres of turbine oil. Just by simply adding this 5% of decon, they were able to solve the issue of these elevated temperatures. And here we are nearly a year later with no further issues. Secondly, we move away from turbines and onto blow molding machines and the plastics industry. This business, Vaxax, down in the southwest of the UK, had issues with the hydraulic oil in these blow molding machines. They visually identified what they then found out to be varnish in their reservoirs. X certainly marks the spot. You can see here, this is one of the hydraulic reservoirs, huge amounts of sticky varnish in the reservoirs. They took some oil analysis, and the MPC wasn't significant, but they also saw sticking valves, elevated operating temperatures, and based on all of that information and the discussions we had and the oil analysis we were able to view, again, from our point of view, the best recommendation was the use of the Fluitec Decon. And again, we recommended a 5% mix ratio, which was about 3 pails of product. Almost immediately, they saw a good drop in the MPC, and more significantly, a couple of months later down the line, when they were able to visually inspect the reservoirs, they were completely clean versus what they had before. So again, for this business, the important element was that they were avoiding expensive downtime. Again, they were avoiding having to invest in a large amount of new hydraulic oil for their machines. And as I said, they were able to avoid downtime moving forward. Next up, and a different scale altogether, a UK oil refinery. So just over a year ago, this organisation approached us regarding some contamination issues that they had identified with their GE gas turbine. Due to the oil analysis program they had in place, they understood they had some contamination issues. The oil itself was nearing the end of its useful life, and they wanted to identify a solution that would effectively clean out the turbine properly when they drained out the oil, so that they had a clean system when they then added the new turbine oil. It became clear to us that a good opportunity and option would be the Fluitec Decon, to add it at a 5% treat ratio, but in a slightly different way from the other case studies we've already looked at. This was to be an actual specific flushing product. So they added these 2 drums of decon to the total product for about 2 to 3 months prior to the organised shutdown of the turbine, which is when they then drained out that oil. And we knew then that the decon would have done a great job at helping to solubilize all the varnish of the internal components, meaning that the varnish was then removed when that oil was drained out, and meaning that when the new oil was added, it had a much better chance of long life due to not having any inbuilt contamination levels. So next steps for the client is to introduce Decon to the new turbine oil to help prevent future varnish contamination, because that's the beauty with a product like Decon. It can be left in the oil, it will prevent any future deposits, and we can always back that up with regular oil analysis, including MPC, to check that the MPC value is remaining low and stable. And then that can stay in the oil for the life of the turbine oil with no problem at all. Next, we're moving offshore. An energy company off Aberdeen with a range of solar gas turbines on their offshore platforms. As with, I think, all oil and gas companies, they have a very organized, well-implemented oil analysis program for their turbines, which includes the full raft of tests, including the likes of MPC and Ruler. And they had identified that on a number of these solar gas turbines, they had elevated MPC values. They didn't have the time or budget to replace the turbine offshore. And so again, we're discussing with Solar different solutions that could be available to them to help lower the varnish potential and safely extend the life of the oil. And Solar, as a business, referred them to us and Fluitec, and due to the success they'd already had with Decon and other applications. And again, the Decon for these large turbines was added at about 5% again, and we were able to see a swift reduction down to about an MPC level of 5, which was nice, low and stable. And that has continued during the last year. The business implemented a management of change, and the next steps is ideally to introduce the use of Decon to other platforms and other rotating equipment that might be suffering from varnish as well. In terms of the next steps, other solutions that have also been discussed include the Vita ESP V100 filter units. These are relatively new in the last year. They were developed by Fluitec in conjunction with Solar turbines. And why they are proving to be popular with the offshore oil and gas industry is due to the fact that they can be safely integrated into the turbines or the equipment's lube oil system. And there's no need for additional power, which can be a big issue for platforms when having to introduce a new solution, if they're having to find new power sources, etc. So this is something they're looking very closely at. As I mentioned briefly at the beginning, the Vita ESP is a unique gel resin technology designed specifically for removing varnish. So in this case, they've already helped to solubilize the varnish from the internal components. It's in the oil, but then once we can implement the Vita ESP, these filtration units will then strip the varnish from that oil quite safely. And then secondly, for some of the other applications, again, due to oil analysis results, we've identified by using the Ruler technology that Dr. Abid mentioned, they've identified that antioxidant additive packages are a bit depleted in some of those oils. So we're also looking at the possibility of using Decon AO, which stands for Decon Antioxidant, which through careful consideration and measuring, we can then replenish those antioxidant additive packages for the turbine oil, meaning that we can safely extend the life of that turbine oil, and meaning that it doesn't have to be drained out and replaced, which would then lead to expensive downtime for these platforms. For our final case study, we stay offshore up in Scotland, some solar gas turbines, as well as some Siemens gas turbines and compressors. Again, this organization has a very well-established oil analysis program for preventative maintenance. Again, there was elevated MPC values identified. I actually met them up at one of the offshore shows in Aberdeen, and again, they didn't know what to do. They had these elevated MPC values, which they knew meant high varnish potential. They could see the elevated bearing temperatures as well, but they didn't know what to do in terms of, they didn't have, again, the time or budget to be having to drain out a lot of the oil. The rest of the oil specs were fine and in specification. So again, we are still in discussions with this particular organization, but the Decon has been recommended and purchased. The first application will be a Siemens gas turbine later this year. once they've had to implement an oil change due to maintenance issues, that particular turbine's down. And then the next step is hopefully going to be some of the Siemens electrically driven compressors. We've got about 5,000 litres of oil in there. And the aim again is to introduce the use of decon there to be able to safely decrease the varnish potential. So those are the 5 UK-based case studies I wanted to introduce to you today. And just a few conclusions before I finish. Firstly, I believe the case studies have proven just how easy and effective it can be to not only identify and measure varnish potential by using the MPC analysis, but importantly as well, by then also confirming that solutions such as decon or Vita ESP have then done their job at successfully removing the varnish. For us, it's a very powerful tool, the MPC, and it's used by most oil analysis labs. We know it's something that we are recommending any clients with turbines implement it with their oil analysis program if they're not already doing so. Secondly, the ease and effectiveness of quickly and relatively simply reducing varnish contamination by using technologies such as the Solvanza products like decon, which is really important because very often it's not necessary to have to flush and drain out large quantities of lubricants if the rest of the oil spec is within specification. They're still fit for further use. So it's an easy implemented solution, no capex required. And as I've said before, it can be easily and effectively measured that it's actually done its job afterwards. Thirdly, hopefully you've seen the recognition and support that there is behind these types of solutions from really key OEMs. I've mentioned Siemens, I've mentioned Solar. Dr. Quick at Siemens has been a big supporter of Fluitec solutions because of the success we've had. Siemens actually list a number of the Fluitec solutions in their operating manuals. So that's been an important, because we're getting more and more of these referrals from some of these OEMs. And then finally, the Fill for Life strategy that I've mentioned and that we've been talking about in these case studies is really helping to prove that sustainability can be improved for a variety of companies by helping them reduce this lubricant consumption and also the CO2 emissions by safely extending the life of these lubricants. And that's really summed up in this Fill for Life model diagram here from the very start, the monitoring, reporting, the measuring with that technology we've been talking about, the consulting and the recommendations, and then the various actual solutions depending on the application and the operating conditions, whether it's replacing additives, replenishing additives, or removing varnish, or actually filtering out the varnish as well. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it. And I'm now available for any questions that you might have.
All right. And I think we actually have quite a few questions. Angus, you did really well. Thank you so much for sharing that information. Very interesting to see what's going on in the UK, especially with all of the things that we have,
Yeah.
in that particular area, because I know we have so many different sectors. You have offshore, you have power generation, you have all of these great things, and it's still being able to, do a lot of things. So I'm gonna jump straight to your questions. So
Okay.
we actually had Mohammed asking what components need to be added to the product to minimize varnish. So I think he's probably talking about decon being added to the different
Yes.
products. Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, the decon is one product. It's a Group 5 base oil component. It's just a fluid, no capex required. It can simply be added to the reservoir. So there's no actual components as such. That's the Solvanza products.
Yeah.
All the different decon products can just be simply added to the reservoir. So
And
it's a simple
I think
process.
you gave him a really good answer there with the Solvanza products. I
Thank you.
know Guillaume is saying, thank you so much for your great presentation. And what do you think about depth media filtration? Oh, Guillaume, of course you're going to ask about the depth media filtration. Definitely. Good question there, though.
I don't personally have a lot of experience with the depth media filtration. With the work I've been doing with Fluitec, it's always been to do with the gel resin, the Vita ESP, which is designed specifically for varnish removal. I do know that there has been some really good success with a variety of other filtration solutions. I know Delta Zero, for example, have had really significant success with their unique filtration technology in lowering MPC values fairly significantly. But as I said, my main experience, Guillaume, has been with the Vita ESP and the many case studies I've seen around the world with multiple different industries and just how effective it's been. Particularly with the team in Middle East, in Qatar and Saudi Arabia, they've had huge success with the Vita ESP and offshore platforms.
All right. And your questions are coming back in. So we have Jorge. Thank you, Jorge, for joining us. We know you on LRV, so definitely. What is the impact on the results when measuring MPC with equipment based on ASTM D7843 and equipment that is not and also used in facial makeup, typically used in laboratories? Trying to see if that's a little bit of a typo there. But I think he's trying to just verify if you use MPC and you're measuring MPC
Yes.
in the lab, like how is that different from I'm hoping he gives me some clarification somewhere. But how is that different from, I guess, being used out in the field in terms of physically?
Okay, so I think from what we're seeing, it's a much more accurate indication of the varnish potential. I look at the work my team did in Costa Rica, for example, with the local power industry there. Again, they knew, as you've seen some of these case studies, they knew visually they had some varnish issues. You saw some of those photos, but then MPC is able to back that up significantly, very accurately from a laboratory perspective. I hope that answers the question.
I hope so too. We have a quick question from John. Where does the varnish go when Deacon is used, Angus? I know this is
great question, John. We get it asked all the time. It's not disappearing. The decon solubilizes the varnish off any internal components, and then it remains in the oil. But the way the decon works is that it then prevents that varnish from depositing out. So best practice would dictate, as I mentioned about the VTSP, once you've used the decon, we'd also suggest that you also introduce filtration, because then you remove that varnish from the lubricant. And that's what particularly a lot of offshore oil and gas companies do. They have the belts and braces approach. They use the decon, and then they also use the filtration to remove the varnish from the oil. But we also have many customers that leave the decon in the oil, the varnish remains in the oil, and we back up that point that we run regular analysis with the MPC to prove that varnish is not reappearing and redepositing on the components.
Definitely, because once it gets solubilized, it's not going to plate back out
right
away. So, good thing to know. That was a really good question. So we do have another question. We have a lot of questions for you this morning, Angus. We have another question from Assad. He's saying, could you provide an estimate of the downtime costs and anticipated savings? This is a nice one. I like this one.
It's a great one. You might remember on my first slide, it was a snapshot of a case study that I didn't actually present because it wasn't UK based, but that was talking about an offshore platform that saved $2 million due to the implementation. I think it was a Vita ESP. As you can imagine, it's obviously going to vary industry to industry, but if we focus on the offshore oil and gas, we know just how expensive an hour of downtime is in the North Sea. They can't afford to have a turbine down for 3-4 days due to the reduction in production. But also even Novia, they're a plastics plant. Again, they had one solar turbine. If that was to go down for a week, the plant's down for a week. I mean, I don't know how much that would cost, but it would be millions of pounds again. So I think most of us know that, an hour of downtime in most plants these days is extremely expensive, because so many plants are running 24/7. If you lose that hour, you're never going to get it back.
True, very true. I have a quick question from Dr. Ovid. He's asking about decon and if it has a high degree of polar or non-polar characteristics of a chemical that might affect sealing material in the longer run. Do you want me to handle that one?
Well, it's a great question on an issue, but then you can follow up. We know through a lot of experience and expertise that it doesn't have an effect on the sealing material, and that's a question we get asked a lot, and guarantee that it won't cause issues with applications. And in that way, it's a very safe product to use and very compatible with a range of base oil fluids.
Definitely. And one of the things with the decon product as well is that it's based on the Hansen solubility principles. So it's, while we know about the polar and the non-polar varnish, and all of those great things, based on the Hansen solubility principles, it will dissolve the varnish easier because it has similar characteristics of the varnish. So that's why I'll keep it in solution. And it does not affect those sealing materials because of the way that it's been um, engineered, I would say.
Exactly.
So we have one more question from John, and he's asking if it would not be detected in the MPC tests. I'm not sure exactly what would not be detected in MPC tests, but the MPC tests would help you with your varnish
Yeah,
potential. It's
exactly.
always good to pair that with your ruler analysis because that
Yep.
helps you to gauge what the actual what's going on in your oil in terms of antioxidants and if it's oxidizing or not.
Yeah, and all the rest of the standard
Oh
tests that
boy.
we talked
Yes,
about.
all of
As, exactly.
everything else. You can't just use one alone. When you go to the doctor, they don't just do one blood test, they
No,
do all of them.
exactly.
Yeah. So that's how we try to keep it make sure we understand what's going on with the oil, and we can do that and make sure that we have some idea. And you give us a great presentation this morning, Angus. We are just
Thank you.
about out of time for your session, but thank you so much for sharing your information with us.
It's
It's
a pleasure.
always
Thank
good
you
to
for the
talk to you.
opportunity. You too, Sanya, and
All right.
well organised. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for all
Yes.
the questions, and thank you for listening today.
Yes.
Enjoy the rest of
Thank
the
you
event.
all so much for the questions. We are gonna have Hadi Katani joining us in the next 9 minutes. So stay tuned for his presentation. It's gonna be good. So Angus, we will be seeing you on the back end at some point in time. All
See you
right.
soon,
Bye
Sanya.
for
Thank you so
now.
much. Take care. Bye now.